Why are there no good pirate games? That's the question I asked on January 24th, 2023, in my 5th video post on this channel. Why are there no good pirate games? My answer in this video, delivered through your left audio channel only with stolen gameplay footage, was essentially that creating a properly full-featured pirate game is too big of a task. To develop the uncompromised pirate experience that everyone is looking for, there's too many systems that have to be included, and they have to be implemented in ways that don't interfere with each other. Since I posted that video, Skull and Bones released to the amount of fanfare that it had leading up to its launch, which is just about zero. I don't think I've ever seen a game that was in development for so long that absolutely no one wanted to play. Also in that time, Sea of Thieves had 37 expansions released, so good for them. But it's not exactly the single-player pirate adventure that a lot of people are looking for. And just once, I'd like to see the Rare logo appear in an Xbox showcase for something that doesn't have to do with Sea of Thieves. Don't talk to me about Everwild. It doesn't exist. We are going to get Metal Gear Solid 6 before it even hits alpha. Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag has remained the high watermark of the piracy genre for over a decade, but it's important to remember how it got there. All of the pirate elements were laid on top of the existing Assassin's Creed framework. If the game had sailing and ship battles, but no on-foot segments, it wouldn't be nearly as fondly remembered as it is now. If it was only the on-foot segments, it would just be another Assassin's Creed game. Lord knows we've had enough of those. So in order to have a good pirate game, it needs to be a lot of game. To only go for a half measure would be holding progress back, like the man who speaks with authority but doesn't speak with integrity. Developing a worthwhile pirate game is a massive undertaking, but one that can be at least somewhat alleviated by building on top of an established foundation. Enter Like a Dragon Pirate Yakuza in Hawaii. The Like a Dragon, or Yakuza, whatever you want to call it, series is one I'm a big fan of. Nothing more than a whim, I bought the Yakuza Origins bundle in the PlayStation Store and fired up Yakuza 0, and I was hooked. I'm not normally one to go for word-heavy games, but Yakuza is a different story. I was gripped by the narrative, entertained by the sub-stories, and absolutely fed by the combat. The world that Ryu Ga Gotoku created achieves a level of realism that you don't see in many other games. The sound design, the crowd density, the creativity behind all the characters you meet. It all comes together to form a world as real as a video game can deliver. You can play a Like a Dragon game straight through to experience the main plot. You can also just use it as an opportunity to chill out, walk around, play some mini games, go out to eat, and just take it all in. You can enjoy the games for the grand adventure or for the little details. There's a craftsmanship to each title that is not to be underappreciated. After Yakuza 0, I ended up playing every mainline game in the series. That's 0, Kiwami 1, Kiwami 2, 3, 4, and 5 remastered, Yakuza 6, The Song of Life, Yakuza Like a Dragon, and Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth. Plus, I squeezed in Like a Dragon Gaiden, the man who erased his name. Can't miss that one. I have not played Judgment, Lost Judgment, or Like a Dragon Ishin, but you can bet I'll get to those one day soon. I haven't played and do not plan to play Yakuza Dead Souls because it's stranded on the PS3, Fist of the North Star Lost Paradise because anime scares me, or either of the Japanese-only PSP games. I'll get to those right after I play Final Fantasy Type 0. So with these 10 games I've played, I'll give you my opinion on each one. And I'll do it in the only venue that's appropriate to rate a series of games, a tier list. Okay, what's going on? We are here going to do a Like a Dragon / Yakuza tier list. We'll do these ranked from S to D, and I want to make it clear that ranking these is relative to each other, not overall across the board of all games. So if one of these is in a lower tier, that doesn't mean it's a bad game, it's just not as good as the others here. Because don't get me wrong, these are all great games, all totally worth playing. I'm also going to say very light spoilers for this. I want to give a general idea of what each game is about, but I'm not going to spoil any specific plot points or twists. Alright, we got 10 games here, so let's get started. Alright, first up we got here Yakuza 0. So a lot of people say that this is the best one, and it's kind of hard to argue with that. You play as two different protagonists, Kiryu and Majima, and it's cool to see their two separate stories slowly intersect in a really interesting way. Particularly Majima's introduction is just fantastic. The combat for both is great, with multiple different styles for each of them. Great sub-stories, great minigames. Really just an all-around perfect place to start with the series. I've seen some disagreement of whether you should play Yakuza 0 first or you should play it after Yakuza 5 because that's when it came out. So I think the only real solution is play it twice. Yeah, so we are going to go ahead and put that right in the S tier where it belongs. Alright, Yakuza Kiwami. So this is a remake of the original Yakuza from the PS2, and I'm sure there's going to be people who say you should start with that one, but really, Yakuza Kiwami, perfect place to start with the series. It does have multiple different combat styles, like Zero, which is super fun. Nishikiyama is a really great villain, which is a lot because of his personal connection with Kiryu. It also introduces Haruka, who is a mainstay character of the series, but having to tote around a little girl a lot at the time, it's like, eh. But the Majima Everywhere system is really funny and just a lot of fun. So let's go ahead and put this in the A tier, right? Yakuza Kiwami 2. So similar to Yakuza Kiwami, this is a remake of Yakuza 2 from the PS2. This one uses the Dragon engine, which looks and plays really, really nice. A big step up from Zero and Kiwami. So the plot sets some pieces in motion that stay for the rest of the series, like Daigo becoming the chairman of the Tojo clan, and it also introduces some good new characters like Sayama. The plot is not anything that special, but it is cool to see some flashbacks of Kiryu and Kazuma and see how those events in the flashback affects what happens in the game. But some of the plot twists are a little bit ridiculous, like what happens with Terada. It kind of feels like during the development of the first game, they didn't really know what they were going to do after, so this is kind of ramshackled together. So overall, I'll put this in the B tier. Alright, Yakuza 3 Remastered. So coming off of Yakuza Kiwami 2 in the Dragon engine, which looks so good, coming to this, which is a very mild remaster of a mid-gen PS3 game, it's rough, I'm not gonna lie. The combat is definitely not as smooth as those other ones we've already done because this is technically the oldest game I've got here. I do like the story more than most people though, I think. Kiryu starts off in Okinawa, which is very different from the environments of the past games like Kamurocho and Sotenburi, but I think it really works. And I know a lot of people don't like that it has a very slow start at the orphanage, and I do understand that it takes a while to get going, but all the interaction that you have with the characters there is super important, not just to see Kiryu's motivation and character for this game, but also for all of the games that follow it. Some of the choices of where they go with the plot later on are a bit questionable, but I do really like all the characters that you meet in Okinawa. So definitely not the best Yakuza game, but I think within the series, it is a bit underrated. Not underrated enough though, I'm going to put that in the B tier. Alright, Yakuza 4 Remastered. I like this one a lot. It's almost certainly the shortest of all these games. I beat it in just a couple days and I wasn't trying to speed through it or anything. It introduces some mainstay characters who go on to appear in a lot of games after this too, like Saejima and Akiyama, who is really a personal favorite of mine. And there's a cutscene with Saejima, which if you've played this game, you're going to know what I'm talking about. That has to be one of the most badass cutscenes in any game I've ever seen. And so he plays 4 different characters, each with their own combat styles and sub-stories and main stories, which is pretty cool. I think the plot is overall really good, but it all hinges on this one twist, which I think really doesn't quite stick the landing. For those who've played it, I'm talking about the RBs, and it requires a pretty big suspension of disbelief to accept, which I think a lot of people can't get past, and honestly, I don't blame them. One other cool thing though is that this game adds some new areas to Kamurocho, like the underground and the rooftops, which don't really get used in that many other games beyond this, but I think they were great here, so I'd love to see them come back. So I'll go ahead and put this in the A tier. Alright, Yakuza 5 Remastered. There are only 2 words you can use to accurately describe Yakuza 5. Holy shit! There is so much game in this game. There's 5 different characters you play as, each with their own gameplay styles, sub-stories, mini-games, all in 5 different cities. It is insane how big this game is. And some of the mini-games are really fleshed out, like the hunting with Saejima, the taxi driving with Kiryu, the snowball fight tournament. 4 of the 5 characters you play as you'll be familiar with from the past games, but it also introduces Shinada, who doesn't really appear in any of the games following, but I do think he was a bit of a prototype for Ichiban, who did become the main character going forward. So even though Yakuza 5's size is what's most impressive about it, that also ends up being its biggest weakness, because it drags on. Particularly when the part after Saejima starts up and you go, oh my god, 3 more characters to get through, it just feels like it does not stop. You're like, oh god, I just want to get to the point. Everything in the game is good, but there is so much of it, it can be overwhelming. But even with that, I really enjoyed it, so I'm going to put that in the A tier. Alright, next up we got Yakuza 6, The Song of Life. So if Yakuza 5 was too much for you, Yakuza 6 is definitely a breath of fresh air in that regard. This time you're only playing as Kiryu, which works well because the story is much more personal to him. The game is split between Kamurocho and Hiroshima, and Hiroshima is new for the series, and it provides a really nice contrast between the 2 cities, as Kamurocho is so hectic and busy, but Hiroshima is a bit more of a laid-back beach town. In Hiroshima, Kiryu becomes affiliated with a local Yakuza there, and their dynamic really reminds me of Yakuza 3 in a lot of ways, which is pretty cool. There's also some really creative sub-stories too, like there's one involving a ghost, and there's one with like a Freaky Friday situation. What's also cool about this game is that every single line in it is fully voice acted, which is not the case with the rest of the series, so it's really impressive the amount of effort they put in to do that. Overall, I would say the plot is pretty good, but sort of similar to Yakuza 4, it really hinges on one big twist at the end, which when you find out what it is, you're like, what? That's it? But this one is in the Dragon engine now, so you're getting those really nice visuals, really smooth gameplay that you had back in Yakuza Kiwami 2. So let's go ahead and put this in the B tier. Alright, next we've got Yakuza Like a Dragon. Reboot alert! Kind of. This one was intended to be a bit of a soft reboot to the series, with Ichiban Kasuga now taking the main stage, and the majority of it takes place in a new city in Yokohama. And the combat is entirely different. It's no longer like an action-y beat-em-up brawler. Instead, it's now a turn-based RPG where you have a party of 4 characters. So I could see how that drastic of a change could rub fans of the series the wrong way, but I like both action-y beat-em-up games and I like turn-based games, so I was happy with it either way. And overall, the combat and the different jobs you can use, it's all super fun. And Ichiban is just about as great of a main character as you could ask for in a Yakuza game. He has a lot of the nobility and kindness that Kiryu has, but he's also a lot less stoic and more goofy and silly, so it is a really nice change of pace to play as him. And the story is absolutely top tier. It's very personal for Ichiban, has a lot of great twists. It is just gripping from start to end. And there are some really emotional moments in the finale too. For being a place to start in the series, I still recommend playing all the other games first. But if you want to skip these 7 games, then Yakuza Like a Dragon is a perfectly fine place to start. So yeah, I love this game, and this is going in the S tier. So now we've got Like a Dragon, Gaiden, the man who erased his name. This is technically a spin-off, but it centers around Kiryu again, so it's pretty essential for his story. Kiryu takes on a kind of a secret agent role, which is a fun change of pace. The combat is back to the traditional beat-em-up way, but you have 2 different styles to choose from. Yakuza, which is what you've been essentially using the entire time with Kiryu, and also Agent, which lets you use gadgets like rocket shoes, a wire that shoots out of your watch, and drones, so that's a ton of fun. The game happens at the same time as Yakuza Like a Dragon, and it influences what happens in Infinite Wealth. So it's really cool to see how these games like interweave with each other. But related to this, there is one big point of disappointment I have, and it's that there is one fight in Yakuza Like a Dragon that I was really hoping you could see play out on the other side with Like a Dragon Gaiden, but they kind of just skip over it, which is a big bummer. Really like a wasted opportunity, I think. And the ending, which I won't spoil, but it has to be the most emotional ending out of any of these games. It is really something and so worth it if you've been playing all of the games leading up to this. So let's put this one in the A tier. So finally, we've got Like a Dragon, Infinite Wealth. This one is now back to Ichiban, and it takes place primarily in a new city, Honolulu. Honolulu is really a fantastically done location. I've been there and it is insanely accurate. The combat is similar to Yakuza Like a Dragon in that it's a turn-based RPG and there's a lot of the same moves, but now the physical placement of your characters and the enemies plays a role in how combat plays out. So like if you hit an enemy at their back, that'll do more damage. And that's really cool and a big improvement, but I also wish they'd pushed it a little bit further, maybe take some notes from games like Fire Emblem or Baldur's Gate, but a ton of fun for sure. I also really had a good time with all the Sujimon battles and the storyline with that, which was sometimes funny, but also sometimes pretty real. But there are some pretty big downgrades, especially when it comes to the story. For one thing, the plot is much less personal to Ichiban than it was in Yakuza Like a Dragon. For a while, you think it's going to be something that's very personal to him, and then it all shifts around and it's just not. At that point, I was like, well, I don't really care anymore. The main story also splits into two at one point and kind of undoes a lot of the work that Yakuza Like a Dragon was doing in terms of making it a new place to start for the series. Because if you play that and then you go to this, you're going to spend a lot of time with characters you're not super familiar with. And I liked that side as someone who's played all the games, but it didn't feel very cohesive, and I think it would have been better as another spin-off game in addition to this one. The two sides do connect to each other, but it's not that strong of a connection, and at the end can feel a little forced. And so as a result of that, the ending feels pretty weak and unsatisfying, especially when you compare it to the last two games. Also, the Dondoko Island really disappointed me. This was something I was very much looking forward to before I played the game, but how they incentivize building is just totally out of whack. It basically rewards you for just covering the island in junk, which is the exact opposite of the plot line of it, so it feels so weird. And overall, I just found that island super grindy and boring. I played it for a bit and then I left and I was not coming back. So yeah, Infinite Wealth, I liked you, but I wanted to love you, so you're going in the B tier. And so that is my Like a Dragon tier list. 10 games, some better than others, but all worth playing. So now, let's get back to Pirate Yakuza in Hawaii. So the Like a Dragon series is one of the most incredibly consistent in all of gaming. There are some highlights, a few slight lowlights, but each entry in the series is enjoyable in its own right, and above all, worth playing. Who you follow from game to game does get changed up quite a bit, especially in 4 and 5, but every playable character the series throws at you ends up being likable in their own way. When you play through all the games, there's a level of comfortability that develops from seeing the same UI styles, same minigames, the same cities, and many of the same characters. You feel acquainted with the cities in particular, especially Kamurocho. You end up getting familiar with its streets and landmarks, and it feels like you're coming home again when you fire up the next title. Coincidentally, I also made a video about how the Yakuza series is like a TV show, mainly due to how its reuse of a few cities is similar to how a show will make use of the same set over years and years. I want to add that I made that video before the Like a Dragon TV show was announced, so I think I deserve a bit of credit. So it's through the reuse of locations, textures, minigames, and animations that the series has become infamous for that it's able to maintain this consistently high level of quality over decades. Asset reuse can be a bit of a taboo topic in gaming, with it being a foolproof avenue for the masses to criticize the developers as being lazy. But Ryu Ga Gotoku has turned what's often seen as a weakness into one of its biggest strengths. When you fire up a Like a Dragon game, you know what you're getting. Besides, there's YouTubers who reuse the same topics for videos every day. Should we be criticizing them? Yes, we should. While Pirate Yakuza in Hawaii might have some of the most new and out there content of any Like a Dragon game, it's still a Like a Dragon game, through and through. There's a duality to the material being delivered. On one hand, you've got a completely unseen world of sailing and piracy. On the other, you have a retread of many aspects you've seen in other games in the series, particularly Infinite Wealth. Honolulu makes a return and is the main city setting that you'll be constantly revisiting throughout the game. There is where you'll find many of the same activities and minigames as the last title. You have Sicko Snap, a wildly entertaining parody of Pokemon Snap, where you take pictures of depraved perverts that you'd normally only see in the far back rooms of an under-budget cosplay convention. There's also Crazy Delivery, a crazy taxi style minigame that lets you live out the cruel exhilaration behind the crushing poverty of an Uber Eats delivery biker. The Aloe Happy photo rally returns alongside a fantastic cutscene featuring the man himself. Many of the sub-story characters make an appearance, and a lot of the same restaurants and stores are available for Majima to shop at. Many of these repeats are very close to how they originally appeared. One thing that's impressive about the Like a Dragon series is how it's able to take something that already exists and twist it in enough ways to make it feel novel. The main example of this here is the combat. Aside from the last two main entries, the franchise makes use of fast-paced, action-oriented, beat-em-up combat. Pirate Yakuza is no different. Playing it, you'll find the same hit sequences, blocking and dodging, heat actions, and button combination attacks that are present in most other games. But it's what this title adds on top of the classic combat that makes it special. There's two combat styles that the game features, Mad Dog and Sea Dog. Mad Dog is closer to what you may expect from a Yakuza game. Familiar attack combos and the ability to pick up almost any object to use as a weapon. But even this style, while being more traditional, adds some extras to spice things up and make it stand out from past titles. First of all, Majima uses his iconic dagger, which is a pleasant switch up from Kiryu's standard two fists approach. There's also special moves you're able to do by holding either the light attack or the strong attack buttons, those being a heavy hitting uppercut or a powerful forward dash. You can also occasionally create duplicates of yourself, which is an ability that has been a long-standing Majima staple. Something new to both styles is a very high jump, which can be used to dodge enemy attacks or tap into a few fresh ones of your own. Mad Dog style is better for smaller groups and boss fights, but Sea Dog is what you'll want to use to take down hordes of enemies, which happens pretty often. In Sea Dog style, Majima swaps his trademark dagger for two swords, a gun, and a grappling hook. If that sounds fun, it's because it is. Slashing through a mob of enemies with the swords is an absolute blast, and is flashy enough to be very stimulating while also maintaining enough visual clarity for you to know what's going on. Every movement you do is fast, whether it's attacking or dodging, so the dynamics of battle can drastically change from second to second. By holding the light attack button, you can throw both swords like a boomerang, freeing you up for some fist-to-face combat before they return. By holding down the heavy attack button, you can shoot a pistol, and holding the dodge button lets you attach to an enemy with a grappling hook and zoom towards them, which is very useful for covering the long distances you'll be constantly facing. Some of the battles you partake in are absolutely massive, definitely some of the biggest I've seen from the series, especially when your own crew gets involved. Overall, I have just 2 points of criticism for the combat. The first is that jump and sprint are mapped to the same button, which gets annoying when you want to do one, but you end up doing the other. You can only jump when you're sprinting, so doing a simple action like jumping can end up being a more drawn out task than I'd prefer, and I end up just not using it as much as I'd like. The second is a problem that's been prevalent in the series for a while, and that's that there's no intuitive lock-on feature. You can hold the right bumper to stay locked onto an enemy, which works well when you're only fighting one person, but when you want to switch who you're targeting, you have to let go of the bumper, move around, and aim to who you want to focus on, then hold it again. That might not sound complicated, but for bigger fights when there's enemies all around you and you have to contend with avoiding attacks, it's more of an undertaking than it may seem. What frustrates me about this problem is that it's already been solved by countless other games. In so many other third-person action games, you can target onto one enemy with a button press, and then switch to another with a flick of the right stick. It would be a departure from how decades of Yakuza games have worked, sure, but it would be a definite improvement. But overall, these issues don't bring down the enjoyability of the combat all too much. And I had a good time with each fight I took part in. It's interesting to see how Pirate Yakuza in Hawaii has established a pattern with the Like a Dragon spin-off games. The mainline series is turn-based now, and that's great, but the spin-offs take what the series has had in the past and builds on top of it. Like a Dragon Gaiden, The Man Who Erased His Name, was a similar setup. Here you could fight in the Yakuza style that fans will be familiar with, but on the fly he could switch to the agent style, giving him access to all sorts of fun gadgets. It's the same thing here with Mad Dog and Sea Dog styles. What's interesting to note is that Pirate Yakuza in Hawaii does have the Gaiden subtitle in Japan, so these two games are more closely linked than you might think. The combat isn't the only thing that takes what the series has had in the past and modifies it in new ways, as many of the settings are also derivative of some games in the franchise's history. An LA Island from Infinite Wealth makes a return, and much of the plotline surrounding it deals with the effects of the conclusion from that game. A new area that's introduced is Madlantis, a hidden haven for pirates, vagrants, lunatics, and degenerates of every description. But this isn't the first location like this in a Yakuza game. Far from it. The first few games in the series had Purgatory, Yakuza Like a Dragon had the secret casino and gambling hall, Infinite Wealth had the Sujimon Stadium, and The Man Who Erased His Name had the castle, which is almost identical to Madlantis in both aesthetics and purpose. Looking at it this way, Madlantis isn't really anything new, it's just a different angle on what we've already seen several times before. Also present with some modification are the mini-games. There's the classic ones that return again, karaoke, pool, and claw machines, which are still as bullshit as ever. There's also some new additions, even though they may be more iterative than original. Bang Bang Batting Centers where you hit baseballs at exploding barrels, which is a more bombastic version of what's already appeared in so many past games. In the more populated areas, you're able to hunt bounties, which are specific enemies that you encounter that you have to beat and fight. Again, this is technically new, but really it's just an inverse of the part-time hero missions from the last two main games. Then there's Goro Goro Kitchen, a cookie minigame where you're able to whip up food that will help you in battle, or it can be used to host parties for your crew members. This one is probably the most novel of the bunch, but when you think about it, it's not too different from others that have already appeared in the franchise. It essentially requires you to hold a button for a certain amount of time, press the 4 face buttons in a specific order, and then maybe play some whack-a-mole. This is a lightweight formula for a minigame, one that's been used before, but it's how they layer the style on top that makes it stand out. It's fun to see Majima switch to the chef's outfit to cook while Goro the tiger intently watches, and the benefit of getting something out of it to recover health is very much appreciated. I don't bring up all these examples, settings, and activities in this game being iterations of what we've already seen before as a point of criticism, but rather to illustrate how impressive it is that Ryu Ga Gotoku is able to create very new feeling experiences based off of previous work. LA Island was in the last game, but narratively it makes perfect sense to appear here. Madlantis might not be very original, but it's still an exciting and interesting environment. Some of the minigames and side activities may be very similar to what's already available, but that doesn't mean they aren't rewarding, or more importantly, fun. Although Pirate Yakuza in Hawaii follows the series' tradition of keeping traditions, it also introduces some of the most unconventional content that I've ever seen in a Like a Dragon game. Most obvious example of this is, of course, the pirate ship. What would a pirate game be without a pirate ship? No good, that's what. Thankfully, Like a Dragon, Pirate Yakuza in Hawaii delivers on this crucial demand, and does a good job with it. Pretty early on in the story, you'll unlock your own customizable, upgradable, staffable, captainable pirate ship. It has two main functions, those being getting you around to the different locations of the game, and partaking in ship battles. The ship battles are what I was most curious about going into this. They're very unlike anything I've seen in a Yakuza game before, so there wasn't much for the developers to build on. How the ship handles and what kind of attacks it can do are pretty basic, but it works. You have a machine gun mounted to the bow, and cannons on the port and starboard sides. You start off with standard cannons, but you're able to swap them out for more eccentric options, like flamethrowers and lasers. I liked messing around with some of these, but for me, they were a bit too much of a departure from a properly piratey feeling ship, so I mostly stuck with the cannons. You can also step away from the wheel to attack a ship directly with an RPG or a mounted gun, but since you're obviously not able to move the ship while you're doing this, I didn't find it that useful, so I didn't bother with it all that much. The ship controls very well too, and being at the helm feels about as intuitive as it could. You can boost to accelerate, which also lets you drift. This may not be very realistic, but it is versatile. It can be used to speed out of enemy fire, ram into another ship for big damage, or my favorite, hitting a ship with one side's cannons and then boosting and drifting around and hitting it with the other side's cannons. There's not a ton of variety in how the battles play out, but you're usually taking on multiple ships at once, which does keep each encounter very engaging. If there was one addition I could add to make it better, it would be some way of attacking behind you and giving the enemies this ability as well. You can already shoot them from 3 sides, so adding a 4th rear attack with some different kind of weapon could have added more options and strategy to how to approach battles. So if the game was purely about ship combat, it wouldn't be great, but in the game state, with the sea battles just being one piece of a larger picture, I'd say they do the job, and they do it well. Each one ends up with the exact atmosphere you want out of a maritime conflict. The weather often turns stormy, you can hear your crew yelling, and the music is absolutely perfect. Speaking of the crew, that's another very strong point in Pirate Yakuza's favor. You start off with a handful of scallywags, but before long the need arises to recruit, and recruit you will. The majority of potential crew members can be found back in Honolulu. You walk up to them, start a conversation, and they'll have some task for you to complete for them to join you. What you have to do to recruit these crew members can have a pretty wide range. Some you have to beat in a fight, or give them money, or deliver an item to them, or have a certain pirate rank. I could see how some might find these tasks annoying, but I think they work perfectly. It's a fantastic solution to the problem I had with Assassin's Creed Black Flag. That being that you don't feel any personal connection to your crew members. By having to do a specific thing for someone to get them to join you, they become much more memorable and distinct. Like to get one guy, I had to beat the pool one-shot challenge on medium. It was some nonsense, let me tell you, especially that last shot, which I am certain was just based on luck. You can bet your ass I remember him after that. So going around and collecting the crew members was fun in its own right, and after that you're rewarded by a diverse, wacky, ragtag bunch of pirate pals. To add to the feeling of grand pirate adventure, aside from the main locations like Madlantis or Honolulu, there's a large number of smaller islands that you can sail to and claim their treasure. Most of these involve taking on throngs of enemies, who you can slash away at with 4 crew members of your choosing. There's not a ton to these islands, but they're fun to sprint through as fast as possible to get to the treasure at the end. What also works well is the journey to get to each one. Since you have to sail to them, you'll often have to blast your way through enemy ships, making the entire experience a perfectly piratey pleasure. So in many ways, like a Dragon, Pirate Yakuza in Hawaii tackles many of the challenges that I laid out in my Why Are There No Good Pirate Games video. It's a game that masters many different things at once. It might be the most different game in the series, but it also continues a long-held tradition. One of the most impressive things about the Like a Dragon series is that it's able to balance grounded, realistic drama with absurdist humor flawlessly. In many games in the franchise, the ultra-serious main narrative is contrasted with the wacky, unapologetic sub-stories. This might make it seem like each title could devolve into a thematically incoherent mess, but somehow the developers are able to keep each side from stepping on the other's toes. It's hard to say exactly how they managed to do this, but I'd argue a lot of it comes down to even the most out there events being grounded in reality. Everything that happens in a Like a Dragon game could happen. It just about never would, but it could. Even the more fantastical elements, like Majima creating duplicates of himself, or enemies transforming before you are chalked up to be a result of the perception of the character you're playing as. Pirate Yakuza in Hawaii skirts this line just about as close as possible. The idea of an entire society based off of 17th century piracy existing in the seas surrounding Hawaii is about as unlikely as you can get, but it is still technically possible. The main story also airs on the side of the preposterous, focusing around the hunt for a 200-year-old treasure. But this borderline fantasy tale still contrasts with the very real, very human struggles of the main characters. Noah's medical issues create a butterfly effect that enables the events of the game to happen, a wondrous adventure born out of a very genuine problem. The idea of fantasy versus reality that's present here shows two sides of the same coin, but that's not the only coin. Throughout the game, the player confronts many dualities, ones that don't end up conflicting, but rather complement each other. There's the unashamed modernity of areas like Madlantis versus the antiquity of so many wooden ships. The civilized society of Honolulu versus the endlessly unpredictable ocean. The subdued outfit of regular Majima versus the perfectly on-theme outfit of Pirate Majima. The Mad Dog versus Sea Dog combat styles. The friends and crew members on your side versus the enemies that get in your way. Like a Dragon, Pirate Yakuza in Hawaii manages to be many things, but above all, it manages to be a good pirate game. Alright, looks like we got one more here. I'm gonna go and put that in the A tier.
さあ旅だとまだ見ぬ世界へと嬉しいな